Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've got a couple systems out here that I'm preparing to feed. These are my European nightcrawlers. If you're a regular here on my channel, you might have recognized them. The European nightcrawlers occupy a VERMIBAG Mini, which is a continuous flow-through system. And the other system is just a simple tray over here. The VERMIBAG Mini is like a year and a half old as opposed to this tray, which is maybe a month and a half old. So significant differences in their ages. It was 8 days ago when I last fed these systems, and at the time I don't think I gave them a whole lot of food. I think it was melon and banana peels. So after 8 days we might not see a whole lot of leftovers, but we'll see when we get in there. Today they're getting a variety of different vegetable scraps. These had been frozen. I picked them up from my mom's earlier today. Chunks of broccoli stem, carrot shavings, other types of soup greens, maybe some parsnip, and other things I'm feeding are, one of my staple items is the used coffee, and I had a hard roll that was starting to show signs of mold, so I just tore it up into little chunks and we'll give half to this container and half to this container. So besides those things, I've also got a couple other staple items that usually go hand in hand with feedings. Here I've got a paper towel that's kind of shredded up into little tiny fragments, and I'm also going to be applying a little bit of pulverized eggshell, which serves as grit. When you feed worms, a lot of times you want to include grit, and in my case I usually use pulverized eggshell. So we're going to bring the camera a little bit closer. We'll start over here, and we're going to get these systems fed. So let's get going. A recurring theme in some of my bins lately has been what appears to be excess moisture. So in a lot of my systems I've been removing these plastic coverings. So we'll have to see how things look in here and in the tub that we're feeding. From what I remember, the moisture situation was not too excessive in either of these systems, so I don't think we should expect to find quite as damp conditions as we've been seeing in some of my other bins lately. The castings right here on the surface look really nice. Just like a nice smooth sort of top layer of fresh castings everywhere. The material does seem a little bit more dry than I'm used to. I guess because I'm used to having fairly damp conditions in a lot of my systems lately. So let's see, I think we've already found one of the food items from the last feeding. This is a banana peel. So I'm kind of glad that I didn't come down here with too much food. I am starting to, I don't know if they're coming through on the camera, but I am noticing a couple fruit flies or gnats or something like that. They're just right in my face, zipping around, being nuisances. So hopefully we're not going to have a situation going on in here with fruit flies. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't a lot of fruit flies, but I definitely saw one or two. And I'm thinking that all of this little white speckly stuff might be grit. I've been observing little white speckly stuff in a number of my other bins lately too, and some people have suggested it might be signs of some kind of like a mold or a fungus growing. But here I believe it's probably just grit. Kind of makes me wonder if I could just hold off on adding the grit, you know? I mean, why add more if there's already this much here that you could see it pretty much everywhere? So I think I'm going to hold off on adding grit today, at least to this bin. This bin's been around for a long time, so it's received probably dozens of applications of grit over its lifetime, and I've never yet harvested this container either. So there's I'm sure there's tons of grit to go around in this container if the worms should need it. The other container is relatively new though. So I don't think we're going to see as many signs of leftover grit from previous feedings, as we see here. I'm digging just a little bit deeper to see if I can locate some of the previous feedings remnants, and this is I believe this right here is a piece of that cantaloupe that I had made mention of earlier. This would be a banana stem as well as part of the peel that remains. So we've got some leftovers remaining in here, but I usually don't double back and cancel a feeding when I'm already down here. It's a fairly rare occasion that I'll get this far down into the bin already and then decide, hey, let's forget the feeding. In my mind, all of this older food that we're bumping into here is stuff that the worms can be eating now, or maybe even if they can't be eating it yet, they'll be able to eat it soon, because the stuff requires a little bit of time usually for the decomposition process to kick in, so that the worms can actually begin eating the stuff. So I got no problem, putting in stuff to give it that chance to start breaking down, so that the worms can eventually get to that as well. So I don't think it's going to be necessary to go too deep, because we didn't bring a whole lot of food. So let's go ahead and drop in the stuff that we gave them. So let's go ahead and pull out one or two last little bits from in here if we find anything else, and then we can proceed with loading in today's feeding. I just thought I would find more bits of the cantaloupe rinds. We found that one fairly good sized piece, but I thought I had thrown 2 or 3 pieces in here. Oh, I think that's what I see right here, actually. I mean, this looks like the rind of a cantaloupe, but not much left of it. All right, that's fine. Let's go ahead and get today's feeding loaded in. Yeah, that's not so much left over. That's not so bad. I'm just going to take a few of these pieces of paper I bought along. At some point we can even start using some of this paper that's covering the top of the bin. But I think the worms really like hanging out in that stuff, so I like having that on the surface. Some sort of paper I usually like to have on the surface. And, alrighty. I think before I forget, let's throw a little bit of my coffee in here, but you know what? Let's hold off on that. I'm going to put the coffee in last. I usually like to put the coffee in as sort of a cover for the foods that I'm placing in. So we'll throw in these carrot shavings and broccoli bits. And hopefully as this stuff starts to thaw out and emit a little bit of moisture, it'll land on this dry bread that I put in here and moisten that dry bread. And you know what, as long as we're going to be covering up with coffee in the end, let's also get all these sweet melon bits and banana peels. Let's get all this stuff down low too, so that we can sprinkle a little bit of coffee on the top. Maybe it'll help minimize the number of fruit flies hanging out in here. Okay. People have been suggesting to me that it might be time to harvest this container, and I don't disagree. I definitely think it's due. It would really just be a matter of getting underneath and opening up the zipper hatch and ejecting some of the material from within the container. The stuff at the bottom should theoretically be pretty well broken down. So maybe one of these days, but not today. Okay. Let's get this thing covered up. And keep the moisture that's in there locked in, because it's definitely not overly damp like I've been seeing in a lot of my other bins lately. And we can make our way over to the other system. So here too in this tub, underneath the cardboard, we can see a piece of plastic covering things up, probably giving the worms a nice damp place to hang out. But for whatever reason, I think maybe it's got something to do with the foods they've been getting lately. The bins of mine have been getting very damp, so on many of my bins I've resorted to leaving the plastic coverings off. So we'll see how things look in this bin. Sometimes in my newer bins like this one, which is only, like I said earlier, 5 or 6 weeks old, I'll let the bin remain a little more damp than I normally would, because I feel like by doing so it enables the worms to feel fairly comfortable roaming around pretty much every area of the bin and feeling like they're going to be nice and comfortable there, and breaking all the different types of materials down, whether it's stuff on the surface or stuff that's down deep. So I think we're seeing signs of that, worms hanging out near the surface. I mean, all these castings stuck to all of these little pieces of paper all over the place also seem to indicate that the worms are feeling pretty cozy up here near the surface. A lot of times I'll just have a sheet of paper there that's catching the moisture that collects on the plastic covering, but these sheets of paper are doing the same thing. These little shreds of paper are doing kind of the same thing, is just creating a surface with a lot of dampness, and I think we're seeing some clear signs that the worms are enjoying it. I'm already seeing signs of the previous feeding down here. It's part of a mango shell, mango seed shell, whatever. This would all be grit, I believe. Pretty good amount of the meaty portion of this melon rind remains. I would have thought that that would have been stripped clean by now, but maybe it just needs more time. I thought I saw another piece of that stuff down here somewhere. It's got a little bit of a pungent odor to it too. It's usually something I don't, sense in my bins, is that smell of food starting to spoil. Usually the microbes and the bacteria and everything within the bin work everything that's at that stage down pretty nicely, resulting in a nice earthy kind of a scent within the worm bins generally. But here, maybe it's got something to do with the high degree of moisture, because things are quite damp down in here. And even though we returned the plastic coverings to the Vermibag Mini a moment ago when we finished feeding over there, I'm starting to wonder if this bin might also benefit from a little bit of a airing out, just because of the high degree of moisture I'm sensing down here within the space where the last feeding had been placed in. I'm wondering if maybe it was just the banana peels that they took a shine to and worked on the most, and they've been leaving the cantaloupe rind for later. Because I'm pretty sure that each of these bins received a couple of cantaloupe rinds and a couple of banana peels, and I'm finding the banana peel stem here. Here's another one. But okay, here's a piece of banana peel. But I don't feel like I'm seeing too much of it. I mean, after only 8 days or so since it's been received, this stuff, it shouldn't really be completely gone. I wouldn't expect banana peels to be gone so quickly. Maybe I just broke them up into small pieces. I was sort of expecting them to be whole pieces, but maybe I snapped them into little bits to help with the breakdown process. So what do we do? What do we do? You know, there's different ways to cope with moisture. One of them is to simply accept it, right? Like with anything, sometimes you've got a situation that you think might not be optimal, but sometimes you just sort of accept it and monitor it and just make sure it doesn't degrade into a worse situation. Not to say it's so bad, but still, I certainly feel like the amount of moisture I'm observing in here might be a little bit more than is necessary, and I'm smelling those little funky odors too. You know, another thing is to try to counteract the situation, maybe put in some dry material to help soak up some of the moisture, which would be an option, I believe. And, you know, some of the stuff we're putting in here is dry, the bread, this paper. So, you know, maybe that will be adequate, you know. Maybe if we simply put in some of this dry material into the feeding area, and then maybe even we even supplement it with a little bit more, then we'll maybe we'll see some of that moisture get sucked up into some of this bedding material and reduce the amount of moisture in here. Not to mention that this dry bread is going to do the same. And, you know, this material here, carrots, I don't know, this stuff I don't think is going to bring with it as much moisture as maybe the banana peels and the melon rinds did either. So maybe we'll be okay if we just try to counteract the moisture with just a little bit of dry bedding for now. And if, you know, on the next go around we feel like things are still a little bit too damp for our liking still, then we can maybe consider removing the plastic. But I think on this go around, since it is a fairly young bin also, I think I'm just going to let it remain somewhat damp, because the worms definitely like it that way. I mean, look at all the moisture in this melon, right? So I think we've certainly got adequate moisture in here, that's for sure. Let's sprinkle in a little bit of grit too. Kind of complement the food that they're receiving, and even more dry food. So yeah, maybe this dry stuff will help balance things out a little bit too. So we'll see. We'll come back in here in another week's time or so. Let's see how things are progressing. So let's get things covered up here. Oh, you know what? I almost forget. Every time I almost always forget to sprinkle in the coffee too. See, some of this coffee is developing a little bit of mold as well. And I'm sure that all this bread, by the time we come in here the next time, is going to be covered in mold also. So yeah, I think things look pretty good in here. I don't mind running my newer bins a little bit more damp. Once it starts to get a little bit later in the game, as the bin starts getting closer to the time when I might want to consider prepping it for harvest, times like that I want the material to be a lot more loose and flaky and crumbly. But at this early stage, all this moisture is going to help with the breakdown of all this cardboard material, all these leaf stems. So I don't object to having a little bit extra moisture in here at this stage of the bin's life cycle. So I'm going to move all of this paper to the center so we can take a peek at the outer edges of this bin too. Curious how things look out there. I guess the other option here too would be to maybe not replace that plastic bag covering all the way out to the edges, maybe kind of wrinkle it up a little bit, or, you know, not having, oops, get back in there, buddy. Not having the plastic go all the way out to the edges of the bin all the way around. Maybe allowing the outer edges of the material to air out a little bit and release some moisture along the way. So that might be something else we can consider doing here too. check out how things look over here too. The worms definitely seem to like it out here. I could see a little bit of standing water at the bottom. Good number of worms hanging out here on the edge. I don't think that these worms are complaining. Good dampness, plenty of bedding, all kinds of food everywhere, grit to help with the digestion. So I think that these worms are probably quite content. Although, for whatever reason, I don't know why, a couple of them seem like they want to climb. But normally it's something I don't see happening too much in my bins. Look at these guys over here too. Get back. Get back. I wonder why they're climbing like that. I never see that behavior. It's pretty interesting. So hopefully when I get things all covered up here, they'll settle down. Maybe they just don't like the fact that I'm stirring their environment around and creating a ruckus. And, you know, I'm even wondering if maybe I could just grab another handful or two of that paper that's covering things up across the top here. Because I've got enough of it to go around in a bin that's this young still. Certainly time for all this paper to break down eventually. So yeah, maybe another handful of this stuff wouldn't hurt either. Get back. Man, what's with these worms? I wonder what's going on. I know the weather has been, the weatherman has been warning of a winter storm coming. I believe it starts tomorrow. Maybe the worms are sensing the encroaching weather system and maybe they're getting antsy because of that. I don't know. All right, let me just take a look at everything here. Did I forget anything? Got the food, we got the grit, we got the coffee, even a little bit of fresh bedding here and there. So I think these worms should be pretty content in here. Let's get things covered back up. Yeah, a lot of times I use the residue on my glove as a gauge as to how wet things are. And if things were wet, really muddy in here, then my gloves would be covered in sticky, gooey stuff. But it's really not that bad. I can't complain. So it's here that I wonder if maybe I can just retract some of this covering just a little bit, perhaps leaving a little bit of room around the edges for air to circulate. Give the material in the bin a little bit of a chance to dry out. Although right in the middle we'll have pretty good coverings with plastic forcing the recirculation of the moisture. And the cardboard covering is going to cover up the majority of the bin for the most part too, but maybe just having a little bit of airflow on the outer edges will help a little bit in reducing this moisture level to something a little bit more to my liking. So why don't we try it that way? I think that's going to produce some pretty good results. And then here's some other flying insects. Sometimes it makes me wonder if maybe they're living in the cardboard itself, maybe within the corrugated. All right, everyone, that was fun. That's it for my European night crawlers today. Everyone's well fed here, and they should be good for another week or so before we have to come back in here and check in on them again. So I'll take care of getting things put away and cleaned up around here, but I won't take your time with that since it's boring. Before I go, let me really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to give me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated, and also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.